All right, so welcome everybody. Welcome back. It is February 6th, Wednesday, the first of our ongoing Wednesday composition series. I was telling everybody earlier in our kind of pre-class chat that this suits me best to do a weekly tidbit kind of a class as opposed to just trying to get through all this information in the course of 10 weeks or 3 days in a workshop situation. I just can't. I feel like I need things to sink in. A lot of these ideas have degrees of complexity that need time to sink in. And so this class going forward, it's just kind of open enrollment. If you feel like it's not working out for you, you can cancel. If you want to drop out, you're traveling a couple weeks, you can drop out and come back anytime. We'll be recording and posting everything as usual. And I would say the primary difference between this and what we did last year is it's going to be, as Sarah Sally Bees just said, more time to absorb. And so I'm going to give the ideas in a little bit smaller doses and then give us some time to articulate thoughts on them. If you'll look at all of these words, any of these things would be a class. So we could have line, let's say line plus variety. We could have line plus variety plus tension. That would be one thing. We could have texture plus repetition plus magnetism. And so I'm going to use this map, and we could just do this, just repetition and repulsion. I'm going to use this map rather than just laying everything on the table all at once. We're just going to do it little piece by little piece, week by week. And Mary Jo, we don't have an end date that I'm aware of. I think, we should probably slow down during the summer if we're doing it. But this is modeled after my weekly class here in Denver, where people would just bring whatever they're working on. We would talk about how to, modify the composition, what kind of theme is working, what kind of theme is not working. And yeah, Karen, the band is back together. This makes me feel really good. I have to tell you guys, like I have become very attached to our, what I would call our project, our online weekly kind of wrestling with different ideas. It animates my kind of inspiration and it keeps my head in the game. I'm sure that's true for a lot of you guys as well. And so anyway, if it's up to you, if you want to stick around, great. If you feel like you don't want to do it, if you miss a week, don't sweat it, because we're going to be coming back to these themes over and over again. This is not cumulative the way a book would be. And it's organized, but it's not organized by here, you need this step, and now you need this next step. And once you get that step, now you need the next step. It's just, we're going to go back to all of these ideas that you see on the screen right now and just reconfigure, talk about what they are. And in fact, maybe I should introduce all of these. You've heard lots of them. There is one thing, if I may claim this, I don't know that many other people are doing this, the physics part. Joseph Podlesnik, I think he's kind of in that camp, and I think Scott Connery has some of that too. But at a certain point, we've all been in composition classes or read composition books where they say, here are the elements, here are the principles. And when you Google the elements of design, it's hilarious because it says, what are the 3 elements of design? What are the 6 elements of design? What are the 9 elements of design? Nobody can seem to figure out exactly what those elements of design are or how many there are. And so they're like the building blocks, let's say. They're the tools. We have line. Obviously, line does not just mean a drawn line. It can also mean the way your eye moves through a painting, kind of the line of vision. But the idea is that a line is thin and a shape is thick or thicker. And shapes, anyone who was here last year for the first 2 sessions, we had our chicken noodle soup joke that I'll elaborate on at some point, but don't worry about it if you don't know what we're talking about. But some shapes stop the eye, some shapes move the eye, some lines move the eye, some stop them. You have value, which is the difference between light and dark. You have color, obviously, and I hesitate to use the word color. A great teacher of mine, Michael Lynch, once told me, don't think color, think value and temperature. So stop calling them colors, figure out what the value is, figure out the temperature, and then you can figure out the saturation. That's another version of contrast. But color can be very confusing when you think, oh, well, it's red, and so now what happens if I put green next to it? It's much more like, what are the values of the two, and what are the temperatures of the two, and how do they interact with each other? We'll make that a whole, one week we'll do this. It'll just be about color contrast. One week it'll be about color unity and proximity. One week it will be about color harmony and space. And actually volume would even be a better one there. And then texture is not just the actual physical thickness of paint, it's the agitation within a shape. And I'll go, so don't be overwhelmed. We're gonna do this every week. We're gonna have like a little, this is the template for every week. We're gonna go in here and I'm gonna take some loop of this based on what we're posting in the forum and show you guys examples, show you how to think about it, and then just like, that's it. That week, like I'm not gonna go, hey, color, unity, and proximity. Oh, and by the way, let's also talk about all that stuff. That's where I was getting myself into trouble last time. And you know how I get like the dog with the squirrel kind of a thing, that I promise you, I'm gonna do my best, stay on task, keep it simple, keep it within our allotted time. I'm not gonna throw down, hey, now let's meet on Tuesday. Hey, let's now meet on Thursday and Friday. And I'm gonna record all of it, and just, everybody was freaking out that they couldn't keep up. This way I think is better. It's just gonna be a simple, straightforward conversation about a combination of these elements. So let's go to principles. It's funny because these are all sort of opposites. You could really narrow the number of principles if you start joining some of these, but and actually I'm going to start with unity, because some of these are, I think, misunderstood often. Unity and harmony are not the same thing. Unity means, I do this with my hands a lot. Unity means that two things are kind of becoming one together. They're becoming unified. Harmony is two things that have something really clearly in common. They may not be the same thing, but they resonate against each other in a really satisfying way, where I could put in there disunity is when things resonate against each other in a dissatisfying way. Contrast, obviously, is when that's the opposite of unity. It's when things become very different. Sort of like my hands and my shirt are in a pretty high contrast right now, where my hands and my face, well, if I get on the light side of my face, are not in such high contrast. Again, we'll be going back. Don't freak out if this isn't making sense. We'll be going back over this at great length. Repetition, you just, like the easels behind me, something shows itself repeatedly and it moves your eye. Gradation is a huge, I have a whole philosophy. In fact, one week I think we might do this. Just like those three together, because it's not what you were taught back in your first day of drawing class. That idea of gradation is much bigger than just smoothing out a transition. You can have fast transitions, you can have slow transitions. We'll get into that later. So now this last part, this thing about physics, what I call physics, or I could call it optics. I don't think anyone else really teaches this, and I don't think they take it into account, because now it's not just the elements and the principles, it's how they're interacting. It's almost like chemistry, or physics, obviously, but chemistry is a pretty good example too, that if you have one thing and you put in something else, they don't always interact with each other the exact same way. If you have a really yellow circle and oh, look at that, Peggy's calling. That was funny. She's probably wondering where my homework, I'm supposed to have homework on her page. I told you I wouldn't get distracted. That the physics element of it is the interaction between the parts. It's not just the elements and the principles together. Now it's like, well, what happens if you have shape contrast, square to circle? How do they interact with each other? What if you have color variety? Sorry, guys. It's okay, it's Peggy. It's Peggy Crow Roberts calling. I get to name drop. Peggy's calling me. But I'm late on an assignment, so she's calling to chew me out. You have magnetism. Things pull your eye away from other things. We have attraction. Your eye is pulled to a thing, and it feels like it ought to stay there. We have proximity. things behave in different ways based on how similar, close, and far they are. I wasn't planning this, by the way. It's Vogue composition class. Tension, as something gets very close to the edge of the page, or even closer and closer and closer to the edge of the page, that creates some tension, and that's similar to proximity. Repulsion, when things feel like they ought to not be going together, like there's an Andrew Wyeth painting where the man has a gun, a rifle, over his shoulder pointing backward, and his wife is standing right behind him. There's something about that feels very uncomfortable. And yes, Kathy, I'll hit suspension here. Emphasis, how loud something is versus how quiet it is, how much you want somebody, to pay attention to this piece and don't pay attention to that piece. The amount of time it takes you to look through a painting, the emptiness or openness, and the fullness, the volume, so space and volume. So I would say suspension is in the physics group. Yes, I would call that, depending on how you feel about suspension, it would be either tension or proximity. A lot of this is painting by painting, kind of an understanding. Okay, so at least if this stuff, we'll come back to this every single week. The first thing I'll do every week, and I may change a few of these words, the first thing I'll do every week is I'll say, here's where we are today. We're just going to talk about the relationship between those parts. Or, as I said, if I'm feeling like we're even moving a little bit too fast, we can do something like this. If it's getting confusing, we could just do something like that. Although it helps to go like that. Have a little something to toss in there. But you can see there are hundreds of reconfigurations, hundreds of ways to join these words together. I think it's a lot easier to teach composition, painting by painting, using this language than it is toss a bunch of formulas at you. Now you go do it. Do the Steelyard scale and do the S-curve and all that kind of stuff. I just don't, as Joseph Podlesnik brilliantly says, you use formulas, you get formulaic. If you rely on formulas, you're going to look like you used a formula. And Mona's asking, we'll be discussing a painting as an example. Yeah, and in fact, here comes. Let's go talk about some paintings. I'm going to show you some ideas. Again, this is an introduction class. This is not, we won't have an assignment yet, and we've got some other people who are coming who I know haven't gotten the message yet that we were doing this. So I'll be going over this in a little bit more length very soon. But just stick with me. Do you need anything? Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is our trusty construction crew building the studio downstairs. So yeah, so as for format, we'll start the class like this. I'll talk about what the subject is today. I'll show you some examples, and then I'm going to jump in Procreate. I've got some images in here, and I'm going to just start doing some modifications. We'll see which one of these I use today. I haven't really made my final plan, but something else that I want to talk about before we start any of that. This is maybe the most important thing I have to say, so I'm going to go full screen on it. I run into this so often that it kind of makes me question sanity sometimes. Being an artist does not necessarily mean balancing everything perfectly in a painting. I feel like this all the time. People will bring a painting to me, especially in a workshop, and say, I'll say, no, that looks great. And I'll say, there's got to be something wrong with it. No, there doesn't have to be something wrong with it. It can be incomplete. It can be unbalanced to a degree. There can be something that isn't quite combining in a super pleasing way. But a lot of times that's what makes art great. If you look at Vincent van Gogh, he's doing lots of things wrong all the time, but it's compelling the way he's doing it wrong. And so that's a lot of what I'm going to talk about is, yes, there are principles of design. There are ways to make, a painting match the sofa. And there are ways to make the color schemes appealing and all of that kind of stuff. But I think we have to be careful not to have the mindset where all composition is in service of, quote unquote, the better design. Sometimes it's much more effective like in Edward Hopper's case, to have the design be a little weird, and for sure in Andrew Wyeth's case, and a handful of other artists. So you'll hear me repeat this. I know the first week's always really crazy because it feels like a lot of stuff's coming at you, but this is the DNA of the class. And Treese says, learn the rules so you know how to break them. That's kind of what this is going to be about. And that's what Scott and I, in our Thursday sort of webcast, that's what we're moving toward too, is to show you what, quote unquote, the rules are and really cool ways to break those rules. So anyway, the point I want to make about this is the word balance. I'll say this again because I feel like it's a little disorganized. Balance does not have to be static. It doesn't have to be calm. There's such a thing as asymmetrical balance. There's such a thing as dynamic balance. I'm thinking of, like, think about the Super Bowl if you guys watched it. If you were watching 45 minutes of boring, and then all of a sudden, what if they scored 3 touchdowns, 1, 2, 3 right in a row? That balances. It's dynamic. It's not like a touchdown every 10 minutes. Touchdown, touchdown, touchdown. In football, a touchdown is when you score. In American football, I should say, I think Maureen's here, so, ooh, am I freezing up? Let's let it catch up. But it's not like the idea of balance. This is kind of the central theme of what I'm talking about. Balance does not have to be matched. It doesn't have to be regular. It can be dynamic. It can be interesting. In fact, I suspect, and I hope that you guys will work on this, embrace that idea that, yes, suspense. Thanks, Maureen. Suspense and strangeness and all those kinds of things. This is the place for us to explore those, because it's not a 3-day, here's how to compose a better painting class. It's much more intimate. It's a much smaller group. And I think you've all been through a lot of this already. And so it's going to be I think it's going to be a good place for us to wander. Sorry, I'm kind of going on and on here. Let's find a piece that I can bring up and we can talk about. Oh, this is perfect. I'm going to show you a few paintings here. Speaking of balance. Here's a gorgeous John Singer Sargent painting. One, maybe this, among all of my favorites of his, this is probably top 4 or 5. I just love the surprise of this, the kind of oddity of it, and it's just a gorgeously composed piece. And Kathy said that was in Chicago last year. I should have made a point to get out there and see it. But it's balanced, right? There's not a lot of dynamic. I think maybe the cropping of the top gives it a little bit of dynamism, but notice that the shapes are all pretty close to each other in size and in the quality of the shape. Quality not meaning whether it's good or bad, but in the kind of character of the shape. And they're also sitting on top of each other in a pretty satisfying way. I think he gets a little bit of extra suspension or tension by having that big white and blue area up in the top. But this is what I'm getting at. You'll see we're going to go back and forth between these themes. This to me feels more like static balance. It's calming. It's beautiful. It's soul satisfying. It doesn't feel frightening, at least to me. Everything about it seems calm. Now compare that to this next one. Oh, bear with me. Like I said, I'm out of practice. Now here's a Maynard Dixon that is much more dynamic, I would call that. Much more dramatic. The relationships between the proportion of the horizon to the sky, the left side of the mountain to the right side of the mountain, they're in much more dynamic balance. It's not just this shape and this shape and this shape. Everything's moving. There's diagonals. They're all of different sizes. The proportional relationship is much more interesting, to me anyway. Not that this Sargent is not one of the greatest of all of his paintings, but I think you guys see the difference. We're going to use all of our vocabulary words there to kind of navigate this territory. And you guys are the ones who have to make the choice in your paintings. Do I want calm well-matched, orderly, predictable a little bit, not in a bad way necessarily, but is that the kind of balance I want? Or do I want a more dynamic, dramatic, I don't want to, I'm playing favorites by saying compelling, but you guys get what I'm saying, that it's the foundational difference to me, or the one of the fundamental early separations you can make between different kinds of art is this distinction. There's art that is comforting, and there's art that is exciting or enticing. Some overlap there, but you'll see, you guys know me well enough to know how this, how I put all this stuff together. Yeah, if Carlson, Sarah Salaby says, what if John Carlson, what would he say about those clouds? Probably he would think they were a little light, a little wispy. Let me show a couple more, and then I'm going to do a couple, just quick little reconfigurations. See what you guys think. Okay, so let's start with this one. This is a Monet, and it's very stable. It's beautiful because of its unity. That word comes up. Unity meaning there's a lot of similarity in that piece. And yes, any of you who just went, ooh, that's a feature of unity. When we go back to all of our words, if you dial up the unity, you get that sort of, there's very little contrast in there. You get that kind of calming, unified, comfortable sense. So now what if I do this? Oh, I did the wrong direction. Hang on. How this changes when I change these proportions. Well, not the best job, but you get what I'm saying here. Once I switch this to a little bit more like Maynard-Dixon proportions, this painting completely changes. To me, it becomes much more dynamic. It becomes much less stable. So I'll go back to the original. That's the original. It feels very, to me, predictable, nice and calm. Good job, Monet. But when I switch it to this, a little more dynamic proportion, it gets more exciting to me. Now there's something, my brain does a little bit of a twist, like, oh, I'm not expecting to see something like that. Let's try another one. This is a lot easier to do when everybody's sitting in here oohing and aahing while I'm working on it. So here's a Hans Hofmann. The energy in this Hans Hofmann is within the shapes. So imagine now, I'm going to make another modification. Part of this is me just demonstrating this. This is why you guys get a couple free classes. This is just me demonstrating what we're going to be up to. If I start filling in these shapes, do it on a layer. I'm losing some of that dynamic energy. I'm making it more understandable, more predictable, more, I don't know, you guys throw out some words in the chat if you have words that explain what I'm doing here. A little more stable. And it's funny because Hans Hofmann's later work is much more like what I'm doing right now. This is the one of his that I like the best, but it's sort of an oddball. So if I keep doing this, I keep shutting down that dynamism, it moves toward the other camp. Closer and closer to stability. Right? Even though there's still some crazy stuff going on, but watch when I take it away, see how much more energy and dynamism there is there, even than that little bit. And I could just keep kind of chopping up some of the little pieces. I have to say, I kind of like this better. I could keep chopping up those little pieces infinitely, joining until I end up with something like that. And those of you who know me know that that also fits what I like to do quite a lot. So anyway, for the introduction, okay, so this Gauguin, I think you guys kind of get what I'm going for here. Let's even just look at this Wolf Kahn for a minute. So in this we have suspension. He's chosen the top part. Those of you who are in that composition class, he's chosen the top piece of the canvas for the most important stuff, and he puts a big dark shape up there, and he puts it on top of a very light, very wispy kind of a ground. And he gets something out of that that's different than if he had, well, let's see if I can pull this off. If he had put the barn, if he had anchored it, you know, a little more down to the ground, that feels a bit more stable. Forgive the hack job on the cutting out. But you see how that, like that, there's an instability, just a slight tension and suspension where that has a little bit more resolution. And so, just as an introduction, as I said, I don't want to make any of these presentations overwhelming. I'm going to go back to our words. Week by week, and the first couple of weeks, we're going to go really slow because I want to make sure everybody's on board. And as I said, I know there are going to be some people who come next week who will be mad that they didn't get an invitation by email this week. But you guys know kind of where this goes, is that each week I'm going to take, let's say, harmony of line, and I'm going to show you 5 or 6 examples from art history where they used it. I'm going to show you some people who broke those rules, who, you know, especially people like Egon Schiele. If you're familiar with his figure drawings, he has a lot of variety in his line. We'll just keep plugging these things together week by week, little bit by little bit, and then there'll be prompts. I don't have one today because I don't want to overwhelm you guys with and I don't want to overwhelm myself either, that we're back on the Facebook forum immediately. But I think you guys understand where this class is going to go. If it turns into something you don't want to participate in, feel free. I won't be brokenhearted if you have to drop out. That's part of this is like a drop-in class. It's the equivalent of what I do here on Mondays, or what I've been doing here on Mondays in my studio. If you can make it, great. If you can't make it, don't sweat it. The difference is now I'm recording it, and in the future there will be other students in here. There's nobody here today because it's snowy. I told everyone to just watch at home if they wanted to. But hopefully that stuff makes sense. I'm going to stop the recording and start something new in case you guys have any questions. But I don't want to oversell this idea. I want to leave some of it open. And I'll stop the recording now, but I'm going to still be here for some questions and answers. Oh, I hit the wrong button.